Monster Hunter World Iceborne is a wonderful gaming experience with a whole host of content that Capcom has supported over the past few years, but now we have access to all the game has to offer and we can work towards the best builds possible in the game. So I'm Darcblade with the best of the best builds for the Greatsword in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now when I say best of the best build, I mean a build that is constructed from some of the rarest armour, weaponry and jewels in the game. This gives hunters some of the strongest sets possible. For this series I'll be featuring 4 builds for each of the various weapons in the game, which should cater to a variety of playstyles. When it comes to the Greatsword, it's the hardest hitting weapon in the game, so if you like big damage numbers, this is the weapon for you. However, to balance things out, the weapon is quite slow and timing is key to everything. Understanding the monster's movements, attack patterns, as well as your hunter's moveset is key to success when it comes to the Greatsword. Master this and you'll have one of the strongest damage dealing weapons in the game. Now as the Greatsword attacks very slowly but hits very hard, it benefits the most from just raw attack builds. So for the majority of these builds, they will be focusing on the raw attack stat rather than the element or elemental stats. So the first build is the best of the best raw attack Greatsword build. This build is a strong jack of all trades build. It has very high damage combined with quality of life skills and defensive skills. So for this build you'll need the Brachydium Helm Beta, the Dragon Hide Beta, Dragon Claws Beta, Dragon Barbs Beta and Dragon Feet Beta. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 5 and for my weapon I'm using the Black Fatalis Blade. This has a health regen augmentation and then an attack increase augmentation. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, so I've gone for Temporal and Rocksteady Mantles. So when it comes to the jewels, you've got a ton to play around with. A lot of these are optional and down to personal preference. So I've gone for Resistor Jewels for the Blight Resistance skill, Attack Jewels for the Attack Boost skill, Expert Jewels for Critical Eye, Evasion Jewels to max out Evade Window, Charger Jewels to max out the Focus skill, Handicraft Jewels for some extra sharpness, Protection Jewels for Divine Blessing, Critical Jewels for Critical Boost, and a Challenger Jewel to max out the Agitator skill. As for the jewels on the mantles, these are down to personal preference. Shown here are Heavy Artillery Jewels for the Heavy Artillery skill, as I was recently using this build against Fatalis, and Heavy Artillery helps when it comes to that engagement. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 200 health and 200 stamina, regardless of if you've taken consumables or not. You have a raw attack of 1829 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 15% base affinity, which can be 85% affinity when you take into account weakness exploit as well as the agitator buff. You have a dragon rating of 180 with high elder seal, and you'll have a strong defense of 1111 that is strong against water and thunder, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially dragon. Now when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Attack Boost at level 7. Attack Boost is a skill that increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 5 or above it also grants us a bonus 5% base affinity. You have Critical Eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build. This is kind of essential as it helps counter the negative affinity found on the Black Fatalis Blade. You have Agitator at level 7, which is a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged, increasing our raw attack and base affinity. And as you can easily control when a monster becomes enraged thanks to the whole flint shot mechanic in Iceborne, you can easily keep this buff active for the majority of a hunt. You'll also have Evade Window at level 5, which is a useful defensive skill for this build. Evade Window increases the invincibility frames when we perform dodges and evades and such, so we can pretty much roll through attacks without getting hit. You'll also have Divine Blessing at level 5, which is again another useful defensive skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage should we take a hit from a monster. So if Evade Window doesn't work and you do get hit, then hopefully Divine Blessing will save your ass. You also have Blight Resistance at level 3, which negates all elemental blights on your hunter. You have Critical Boost level 3, which is a skill that increases the damage of our attacks should they crit a monster. However, they will only increase the raw damage of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portion. But as this build is all about raw damage, this skill is very useful for increasing our DPS. You'll also have Weakness Exploit at level 3, which is a skill that grants us bonus affinity when we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity. You'll also have Focus level 3, which is a useful quality of life skill for the Greatsword that allows us to charge up our charge slash attacks more quickly. You'll also have Handicraft level 2, which is an optional skill. This basically increases the sharpness of this weapon slightly. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have the optional skill Heavy Artillery, increasing the damage of cannons and ballistas and such. As I said, heavy artillery is purely optional. Normally for general hunts I would replace heavy artillery with something else, but as I was recently doing Fatalis with this build, it's the reason why it's included here. And then finally for the set bonus, you'll have 2 of them, both attached to the Fatalis legend. For wearing 2 pieces of the Fatalis armor, you'll get the inheritance set bonus, which allows you to break the level cap on certain skills. With this build, it applies to the Agitator skill, allowing us to get it from level 5 to a maximum of level 7, and Divine Blessing skill, allowing us to get it from level 3 to a maximum of level 5, which overall enhances both these skills. And on top of that, for wearing 4 pieces of the Fatalis armor, you'll get the Transcendence set bonus, which provides us 2 buffs. Firstly, it gives us 200 health and 200 stamina, regardless of if you've taken consumables or not. This persists through death as well. And on top of that, it also grants us the True Razor Sharp skill, which severely reduces the sharpness loss when we're attacking monsters with our weapon. So there you have it. As you can see, it is quite a strong build, but it's also an all-round build, combining DPS elements, quality of life elements, and more. But every build out there has pros and cons that hunters should be aware of. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro is its raw damage output, able to take on monsters quite quickly regardless of their elemental or element resistances, thanks to having such high raw attack and affinity based skills. On top of that, this build has quite a few quality of life and defensive skills, from Evade Window to Divine Blessing to Blight Resistance and more. These all add to a quality of the hunt and sometimes make it feel easier than it is. And then finally for the pros is the Fatalis Legend, providing us 2 very strong set bonuses that increase our defense, offense and quality of life overall. But unfortunately there are cons to this build that you should be aware of. The biggest con is probably that this weapon does sometimes have sharpness issues, especially if you are blocking with the greatsword. And on top of that, this is a very jewel heavy build, requiring some of the rarest jewels in the game to make work effectively. But these are the best of the best endgame builds, so they are going to feature rarer jewels, weaponry and armor of course. But if you're able to get your hands on this build, it's one of the strongest in the game, pretty much able to take on any hunt quite comfortably. Which brings us on to the next build, which is the best of the best FROSTCRAFT greatsword build. Now this build can potentially deal more damage than the first build featured in this video, but it lacks quality of life and defensive options. Nonetheless, if you're looking for one of the hardest hitting builds in the game, this is one you might want to consider. So for this build you'll need the Rimeguard Helm Gamma, the Dragon Hide Beta, Dragon Claws Beta, Rimeguard Coil Gamma and the Rimeguard Greaves Gamma. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 5 again, and for my weapon I'm using the Safi Frost Splitter. To be honest, you can use any of the Safi Jiva weapons. This happened to be the one that I was leveling up at the time. But for the awakened abilities on the Safi weapon, you need to have Velkhana Divinity, and then I've gone for attack increases and sharpness increases. As for the augmentations, I've gone for a health regen augmentation and an attack increase augmentation. Finally, when it comes to the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference once again, so I've gone for temporal and rocksteady mantles. So when it comes to the jewels, you've got a few to play around with, so I've gone for expert jewels for critical eye, fortitude jewel which is optional for the fortify skill, evasion jewels to max out evade window, attack jewels for the attack boost skill. A side note, when it comes to the attack jewels, yes I have got a lot of them here and that, but as long as you can get attack boost to level 4 you should be fine. I've also gone for critical jewels for critical boost, vitality jewels for health boost, challenger jewel to max out agitator, and a tenderizer jewel to max out the weakness exploit skill. As for the jewels and the mantles, I've gone for expert jewels for some more critical eye. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 1555 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 30% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when you take into account both the buff from Agitator as well as the weakness exploit skills. You have an ice elemental rating of 220, and you'll have a very strong defense of 1121 that is strong against water, ice and thunder, but unfortunately weak to fire and dragon. Now, as for the skills, first of all, you'll have attack boost at level 7, you'll then have agitator at level 7, evade window at level 5, critical eye at level 4, which can be potentially level 6 when you're wearing your mantles, you have health boost at level 3, which allows us to get our health to that maximum of 200, you have critical boost at level 3, weakness exploit level 3, focus at level 3, peak performance at level 3, which is a skill that grants us bonus raw attack so long as we have full health, adding to our overall damage. You have Quick Sheath level 3, which is a quality of life skill built into the armor we're using that allows us to sheath our weapon more quickly. This is kind of vital on this build as it's incorporated into the playstyle we have to take into consideration, which we'll talk about in a moment. You have Coalescence level 3, which is another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it's still useful. Whenever we remove a blight from our hunter, we'll gain increased raw attack and either elemental or ailment damage as well. You'll also have Fortify level 1, which is a useful quality of life skill when it comes to difficult hunts in Monster Hunter World. Whenever we faint, we'll come back with increased raw attack and defense. And then finally, you'll also have Resuscitate, which again is another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but is still useful. Whenever we are inflicted with a blight, Resuscitate will kick in, granting us increased evade capabilities and reduced stamina consumption. Now, when it comes to the set bonuses, we'll have 3 of them. 2 of them attached to the Velkhana Divinity. First of all, you'll have Critical Element, which is a skill like Critical Boost, but applies to the elemental portion of an attack. So when our attacks crit a monster, they'll deal increased elemental damage, which is one of the reasons why I'm also using a elemental Saphi weapon rather than an ailment Saphi weapon. But more importantly, and the whole crux of this build, you'll have the FROSTCRAFT set bonus for wearing 4 pieces of the Velkhana armor. Well, 3 pieces and the Velkhana Divinity on the weapon. FROSTCRAFT is a unique skill that gives us an extra gauge that we have to manage. This gauge is found underneath our stamina bar in the top left of the screen. Now, when our weapon is sheathed, this gauge fills up gradually over time. With this gauge full, it will allow us to deal extra damage to a monster with each swing of our weapon. But unfortunately, with each swing, it will drain a portion of this gauge, reducing the overall attack bonus. Now you can replenish the gauge by simply sheathing your weapon again, allowing it to recharge before attacking once more. So with the greatsword, it's a case of going into your true charge slash as quickly as possible, sheathing your weapon, recharging the FROSTCRAFT gauge, rinse and repeat. This is how you're able to deal the most amount of damage you can with this build. And then finally for the set bonus, you'll also have the Fatalis Legend Inheritance set bonus, which we talked about in the first build. So there you have it. As you can see, it can potentially be a very strong DPS build, able to take on monsters quite quickly, especially once you master the FROSTCRAFT set bonus and the playstyle behind it. But of course, every build out there has pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is again its raw damage output. Thanks to it focusing on raw attack more than anything else, it is able to take on monsters quite effectively and efficiently regardless of their elemental and ailment resistances. On top of that, the next pro is the FROSTCRAFT set bonus, giving this build the potential to be one of the hardest hitting builds in the game. And then finally for the pros is this weapon doesn't really have to worry too much about sharpness. Thanks to having a decent chunk of purple sharpness combined with a large amount of white sharpness, it means rarely will you have to stop and sharpen your weapon. But unfortunately there are cons to this build. The biggest con for this build is the fact that its DPS potential is reliant on certain buffs. You need maximum health, so peak performance is active, you need the monster to be enraged, so agitator is active, and of course you need your FROSTCRAFT gauge to be relatively full in order to deal a decent amount of damage to a monster. Without that, your attacks will be subpar. And the other con for this build is, unfortunately, although we do have 1 or 2 of them, we do lack defensive and quality of life skills. So you need to be aware of this. But if you're looking for one of the hardest hitting builds in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, I can strongly recommend this build. If you love to see big numbers, then this build will definitely satisfy you. Which brings us on to the third build, which is normally a quirky niche build. And when it came to the greatsword, I was having a hard time finding a quirky one, so I've gone back and made a best of the best true GAIA'S greatsword build. This makes use of the GAIA'S set bonus, which means that we're going to be relying on mantles for the majority of the hunt. Nonetheless, it's still a strong DPS build with a ton of quality of life and defensive options. So for this build you'll need the entire Shara Ishvalda set bonus, which includes the Shara Ishvalda Helm Beta, Mel Beta, Braces Beta, Coil Beta and Grease Beta. I'm also using a Master's Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Black Fatalis Blade again. This has a health regen augmentation and attack increase augmentation. As for the mantles, you have to take into account the recharge time of a mantle and upkeep of a mantle, so I've gone for glider mantles and then one of the elemental mantles, so I've gone for a fireproof mantle in the case of this build. Now when it comes to the jewels, you've got a few to play around with, so I've gone for expert jewels for critical eye, attack jewels to get an attack boost to at least level 4, tenderizer jewels to max out weakness exploit, critical jewel for critical boost, vitality jewels for the health boost skill, a handicraft jewel for a little bit of extra sharpness, maintenance jewels for the tool specialist skill, and charger jewels for the focus skill. As for the jewels on the mantles, I've gone for destroyer jewels for the part breaker skill and protection jewels for a little bit of divine blessing. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 1786 with purple sharpness. You have 15% base affinity, which can be potentially 65 when you're taking into account weakness exploit. You have a dragon rating of 180 with high elder seal, and you have a decent defense of 936 that is strong against thunder, neutral against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have critical eye at level 7, you'll then have attack boost at level 4, health boost at level 3, critical boost at level 3, weakness exploit at level 3, focus at level 3, tool specialist at level 3. Tool specialist is a skill that reduces the cooldown on our specialist tools. So in the case of this build, it reduces the cooldown on our mantles. Tool specialist means that we should be able to have a mantle on our hunter every single minute that we're fighting a monster. You have recovery up level 2, which is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but increases the healing efficiency of potions and such. You have handicraft at level 2, coalescence at level 2, defense boost at level 1, which is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing that grants us increased defense. You'll also have Part Breaker at level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing our mantles, so it should be level 3 for the majority of a hunt. Part Breaker is a skill that allows us to break monster body parts more easily. And then finally, when you're wearing the Glider Mantle, you'll also have Divine Blessing at level 2. Finally, for the set bonus, you'll have the Shara Ishvalda Divinity True GAIA'S Veil. This is a buff that kicks in whenever our hunter is wearing a mantle, so it should be active for the majority, if not the entirety of a hunt. When wearing a mantle, a hunter gains level 3 tremor resistance, ignoring all tremor attacks. You'll gain earplugs at level 5, ignoring all monster roars. You'll gain maximum windproof and maximum flinch free as well. So providing us a ton of quality of life skills for simply wearing a mantle. So there we have it, that is the best of the best True GAIA'S Veil Greatsword build. Despite not being the most endgame or meta set, it's still quite strong and versatile and makes use of a very unique set bonus with the Shara Ishvalda Divinity. But of course this build is bound to come with pros and cons. Its biggest pro is the True GAIA'S Veil set bonus itself, providing us a ton of quality of life skills for simply wearing a mantle. The next pro is that this build has decent damage output. It's not the best out there, but it's still strong enough to bring down monsters quite effectively. Again, thanks to focusing on raw attack more than anything else, we're able to take on monsters effectively without having to worry about their elemental or element resistances. And then finally for the pros is that this build is actually quite easy to craft. It's not relying on the rarest armors in the game, so it could be easier to obtain than some of the other builds featured in this video. But unfortunately there are cons. The first being that unfortunately this build has lower affinity than I would have liked, and the other con is unfortunately this build relies on mantles. If you haven't unlocked a lot of mantles, then you're not going to be able to use this build effectively. But regardless, if you're looking for something different to play with, something that doesn't really require endgame armor as well, this is one I can recommend. On top of that, this build can also be used quite effectively in the Guiding Lands. All you have to do is swap out one of the jewels, so you have a geology jewel, and you'll be able to farm the Guiding Lands quite effectively with this build too. Which brings us on to the fourth and final build, which is the best of the best Guiding Lands Greatsword build. This is a build very similar to the first build featured in this video, but it's been augmented so you can take it into the Guiding Lands and farm the area effectively and efficiently. So for this build you'll need the Brachydium Helm beta, the Dragon Hide beta, Dragon Claws beta, Dragon Barbs beta and Dragon Feet beta. I'm using the Challenger Charm 5 and for my weapon I'm using the Black Vitalis blade. This has a health regen augmentation and attack increase augmentation. As for the specialist tools, these are down to personal preference once again, so I've gone for Temporal and Rocksteady mantles. When it comes to the jewels, you've got a ton to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for a hard geology jewel for the geologist skill, destroy jewels for part breaker, evasion jewels for evade window, expert jewels for critical eye, charger jewels for focus, protection jewels for divine blessing, challenger jewels for the agitator skill, critical jewels for the crit boost skill, maintenance jewels for tool specialist, a fortitude jewel for the fortify skill, and handicraft jewels for some extra sharpness. I've also gone for some more attack jewels on the mantles. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 200 health and 200 stamina, regardless of if you take the consumables or not. You have a raw attack of 1728 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 10% base affinity, which can potentially be 80% when you take into account both the agitator bonus as well as weakness exploit. You have a dragon rating of 180 with high elder seal, and you have a strong defense of 1111 that is strong against water and thunder, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially dragon. Now when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Critical Eye at level 7, you'll then have Agitator at level 7, Evade Window at level 5, Divine Blessing at level 5, Critical Boost at level 3, Weakness Exploit at level 3, Focus at level 3, Handicraft at level 3, Part Breaker at level 3, which we talked about in the last build. It allows us to break monster body parts more easily, but it is also an essential skill for the Guiding Lands as it allows you to break off monster materials that you can loot from them more easily as well. You'll also have Geologist at level 3, which again is another essential Guiding Lands skill. Normally you only really need this at level 1 once you go into the Guiding Lands, but as the jewel sockets allow, you might as well get it to level 3. Geologist allows us to loot the monster materials that we break off of monsters twice instead of once, at least from the high tier monsters. On top of that, Geologist at level 3 allows us to loot the bone piles and mining nodes additional times as well. You'll also have Tool Specialist at level 3, Fortify at level 1, and finally when you're wearing your mantles you'll have Attack Boost at level 2. When it comes to the set bonus, you'll have the Fatalis Legend, which includes the Inheritance set bonus as well as Transcendence set bonus. So there you have it. As you can see, it's very similar to the first build featured in this video. However, the decorations and jewels are changed around slightly so we can farm the Guiding Lands more efficiently. But of course this build has pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is its raw damage output. Thanks to having such a high raw attack, you're able to take on monsters regardless of their elemental or element resistances, which when it comes to the Guiding Lands means that you don't have to go back to camp and change out your build to counter whatever monster you're about to go up against. On top of that, when it comes to the pros, is that this build has all the essential skills that are related to the Guiding Lands, allowing you to farm the endgame area effectively and efficiently. And then finally for the pros is the Fatalis Legend set bonus, which gives us a ton of offensive, defensive and quality of life bonuses. But unfortunately, this build does have cons. Much like the first build, its first con is unfortunately sharpness can potentially be an issue with this build, so it's something you need to be mindful of, and once again this is a jewel heavy build requiring a large collection of jewels to make work effectively and efficiently. But regardless, if you're looking for an endgame build to take into the Guiding Lands to farm the area so you can augment more weapons or armour, then I'd strongly recommend this build. So there we have it, those are the best of the best builds for the Greatsword. Now these builds are aimed to be strong general builds, able to take on pretty much any task in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, but if you wanted to take on tougher monsters such as Elatrion or Fatalis, then some adjustments may be needed here or there. These builds are also slightly different from other meta builds found in the community, but regardless, these are the strongest builds that I personally like to use in the game, and I hope they help you out as well. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the best of the best builds for the Greatsword in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.